Hello everyone, I'm Shyamala Shukla, Senior Consultant for the Public-Private Partnerships Group of the World Bank based in Washington, D.C., joining you today from Nairobi. Welcome to the third webinar of the series, Transparency and Accountability in Public-Private Partnerships. In the earlier webinars in this series, we discussed the institution of Fairness Auditor in Alberta and Canada, and we followed it up with a draft framework for disclosure in public-private partnership projects. And going forward, on June 2nd, we will discuss Freedom of Information Acts and whether these are important for better disclosure in PPPs. On June 9th, we will discuss the International Infrastructure Support System, an interesting tool being developed by the Sustainable Infrastructure Foundation and the ADB. But today, we will discuss disclosure practices in public-private partnerships in Minas Gerais in Brazil. In 2013, the World Bank PPP Group published a review of reactive and proactive post-procurement disclosure practices in 11 jurisdictions globally. And Minas was one of the progressive jurisdictions that we studied. And while all countries reviewed in Latin America appeared to be relatively progressive, what was surprising was that a small state like Minas appeared to be very proactive and progressive in its disclosure practices related to public-private partnerships. Minas designed its institutional framework even before the federal government did so for the whole country, and the PPP unit of the Minas state was established in 2003. It has a wide mandate and is responsible for coordinating and implementing the PPP policy in the state. And besides direct technical support to departments and agencies engaged in PPP, it also provides support to procuring authorities. The unit has also established a PPP expertise center, and it exchanges knowledge with similar units at the national and international level, in addition to managing PPP contracts in the state. And this program has served as a model for other states in Brazil interested in implementing projects and disclosing project and contract information. The state has been serving as an example on practices related to disclosure of project information, draft and final signed contracts, as well as bidding process documentation and technical background reports. Overall, we found that this was one very good example of how government should go about disclosing more information and making processes transparent and letting stakeholders participate in the process. To give us more information on the background and details of how Minas has managed the process of disclosure of project and contract information, we have with us today Marcos Sequeira Moraes, former head of the PPP unit in Minas, currently working as a consultant with the Inter-American Development Bank. Marcos is an expert in public-private partnerships in Brazil with a multidisciplinary background and over 10 years of hands-on experience in not only preparing projects but also managing the entire process and managing contracts, the implementation of the program as it goes forward, and of projects. Marcos has managed several transactions over the years, so he is quite experienced, although he looks young. And more importantly, Marcos is a passionate proponent of greater disclosure in PPP, to the extent of full disclosure without holding back anything. And I would invite you to look at his blog, which he recently put out, calling for full disclosure, and he even goes to the extent of saying that why should anything be confidential. Marcos, a very warm welcome to you, and over to you for your presentation.
Thank you, Shyamala. It's certainly a pleasure to be here with you today. I actually wore my best tie to be here. I hope I'm looking good. It is certainly, I've been a client of those knowledge products of the World Bank for a while now. And as a frequent visitor to the webinar series, I really do believe this is a really important moment to share experiences with other people, other practitioners around the world. So it's really a pleasure to be here. I do have a couple of initial things to say before we enter the subject. The first one is I I'm not at the government anymore. I'm actually with IADB. I'm physically at the IADB right now. We're having a conversation with civil society, among other things, about transparency, and I'm actually in a room with representatives of civil societies throughout Brazil, and they are actually participating in this discussion about transparency. I'm actually trying to increase the transparency of the webinar series, actually. But okay, what I'd like to address with all of you today is this very very simple question here. Can governments benefit anyhow from transparency, or is transparency helpful to governments? My plan is to spend the next 30 or 40 minutes, and at the end I'll come back to this question and see if you agree with me on how to answer this very basic question. The PPPs are quite the aspect of transparency in PPPs is quite interesting, because on the one hand, PPPs create great opportunity for transparency, because very differently from traditional procurement, PPPs offer in one single package contract the whole information about the initiative, including the construction aspects of it, operational aspects, performance indicators, and that characteristic is not very common in traditionally procured infrastructure, in which you cannot easily find what are the performance standards, what are the operational aspects of the project. So PPPs do offer a huge opportunity to communicate with the society several aspects of projects. But on the other hand, PPPs also bring a very difficult. It's very difficult to be transparent with PPPs for the reasons I'll try to explain later. So the fact that PPPs offer opportunities for transparency, and at the same time it offers challenges for transparency, has always brought the subject has always made the subject very interesting to me. But anyway, let's try to go through that question: is transparency helpful to governments? And to do that, I would like to go through 4 main points. I'll quickly introduce you how the PPP market in Brazil is evolving. I'll try to walk you through the institutional environment for transparency in Brazil. As Shamala has said at the beginning, Brazil has had an open approach to transparency. However, there are problems, as I will explain in a bit. Then I'll try to talk about the specific policy in Minas Gerais, which is a state in Brazil, and what have we innovated in terms of transparency. And then I'll try to come to some conclusions, and I hope these 4 steps will help us to answer that very basic questions, which please keep in mind, which is transparency helpful to governments? Okay, how are PPPs in Brazil? This is the PPI database for Brazil, the Private Participation Infrastructure Database. Some of you might be aware of. It's kept by the World Bank Group, by the PIF and other sponsors. That shows the level of investment of private sector, the level of investment done by the private sector under PPP schemes. Well, not exactly PPP, it's just the sectors which are available for the PPI database. But there are PPPs like water, transport, and energy. So one can see that almost $500 billion of investment has been made viable through PPP schemes. It's actually more than that, because the PPI database has a sectoral cut, but it shows a tendency of a huge growth of the PPP markets in Brazil. This is another data. This one is it's from Hadar PPP, which is a consultancy company that shows the number of new projects, mostly in social sectors. So it's not the same projects the PPI database contemplates, but it still shows also a huge increase of initiatives. So that's actually contracts signed per year since 2006. Which again shows a tremendous increase of the mechanism. But more relevant is that governments are increasingly pushing for PPPs, even in a whole lot of different sectors. But increasingly lately, that's not accumulated. That's a per year chart. Meaning it actually means that in 2015, just the first 4 months of the year, 114 new projects were announced. Those will probably become contracts in, say, 2 or 3 years, but they've been announced this year, which just means that the number of projects will probably increase further in the next 2 or 3 years. So my first and starting point in this discussion is that Brazil has experienced a sustained growth of private participation in infrastructure over the last 2 decades. And the PPPs already plays a major role in infrastructure in the region, in Brazil, and well, Latin America in general, but specifically in Brazil. PPPs are just there. They are everywhere. Everybody talks about PPPs, and it's growing fast. And is this program, the PPP program, transparent? If you take a look at the institutional environment of PPPs in Brazil, in which PPPs are being implemented, it's actually quite transparent, specifically if compared internationally. So what you see here on this slide is the 4 stages of the PPP cycle, beginning with the identification and prioritization of the projects, moving to the preparation, appraisal, and structuring of the contract. The third is the bidding, the procurement per se, and then the contract management. In each of those phases, there are regulations about transparency, most of them, which creates a very open and transparent environment. Almost, as I will say in a minute. If you begin with identification, institutionally speaking, most of the projects around the world, around the country, in subnational and national governments are required to be included in PPP plans as soon as they are decided by governments to be implemented as a PPP. These PPP plans, which are done by each government, subnational and the national levels, are typically published in newspapers. So as long as the government decides to do a PPP, the first thing it does is just to include this project in a plan and publish the plan in the newspaper. The problem, however, is that it typically only contains the name of the project, let's say a specific airport, which I'll show in a minute. When projects are initiated by the market, by private companies, through unsolicited proposals, if the government accept the unsolicited proposals and move to procurement, as soon as it is accepted, it is published also in the newspaper. However, again, it's just about the name of the project. I actually have it here. It's not good on the slide, but that's actually a scan of the newspaper that was including the airport in Rio de Janeiro as a PPP, which happened last year. If you were able to see the picture here, it would say that would only state that the airport of Rio de Janeiro is included as a PPP and nothing beyond that. So people will actually realize that the airport in Rio is a PPP, but won't have much more information than that. So my conclusion, and that's what this little hand now means, that On the identification phase, the institutional environment in Brazil is okay, not too good, not too bad. People will be able to realize that a specific project is being planned, but not much more than the name of the project will be actually known if it was up to the institutional and legal environment. So not too good, not too bad, just okay. Could be worse, could be better, it's okay. On the second phase of the project, the preparation, that's where the legal and regulatory environment in Brazil is less detailed. There's not much instructions for transparency in government, subnational or national level in Brazil. One thing it's worth noticing is that the legal framework requires for a public consultation of the draft of the contract and the request for proposals before you enter the bidding stage. So during preparation, as soon as you have final draft of the contract, it has to go through a public consultation. You just go online and spend there for I don't know, 30 or 45 days. You get feedback written by whoever wants to enter the website and leave feedback, and that is used to produce the final version of the bidding document. This public consultation, it is in fact an important transparency mechanism, but it actually happens a little too late because you already have the draft of everything. So it's whichever changes are made due to the feedback that the publication entails, it's not probably gonna change many things because the government already spent a lot of resources putting all the project and contract together. The third relevant thing about the preparation phase, that at the federal level at least, the Court of Auditor or the Audit Office, the National Audit Office, our Tribunal de Cuentas, it has to see the project, see the contract and the bidding documents before it enters into bidding stage. In practice, it creates an approval of the Court of Auditors as a preliminary approval before the bidding and the tender actually begins, which of course helps to create good governance. So again, I think the regulatory environment is not too good, not too bad, could be worse, could be better, but it's okay. You do see the documents before going to procurement through a public consultation, but you see it too late. The Court of Auditors have access to the documents, but again, it's when they are when they are concluded, the draft is finished. So you don't have a along the way process of communicating with the society about the project. On the third phase, which is the procurement per se, the bidding process, that is where the institutional environment in Brazil hits the jackpot. I mean, that's where it really gets transparent. The regulatory environment requires that the request for proposals and the request for qualifications to be published. In most cases, it's done online, and it has to happen 40 days before delivery of the proposals. And that is the full version of the documents, including the contract draft, which, as I will say in a moment, is included in the request for proposals. Another important thing about the bidding process is that all communications with bidders are forbidden except when they are in writing. So say that a member of a procuring agency is seen with a potential bidder having a coffee somewhere. That's legally forbidden. So all the communications need to be done by writing. And this document, this correspondence, this letter, typically nowadays, emails, are public for anyone to see. Typically, they are proactively published in a website. All these questions and answers that are done throughout the procurement process. Third, as I mentioned, the contract, unredacted, is fully disclosed as an appendix or the request for proposal. That is actually a consequence of this one-stage, non-negotiated procurement process, which we were discussing about India just a couple of days ago. The fact that there cannot be post-bidding negotiations or negotiations during procurement means that the text of the contract published as an appendix to the RFP is pretty much the text that will be signed as the outcome of the procurement process. What it means is that the contract is public conceptually, which is different from jurisdictions where negotiation happens and you don't actually get to see what the final contract looks like. The final contract looks like the one published in the RFP in the case of Brazil, which is an important thing for transparency. In the fourth, an important thing is that even the proposals of the bidders, during the analysis of the proposals, they are public. They are not, from the legal point of view, they cannot be protected under commercial secrecy terms. One has to be honest here. In most cases, they are not published proactively, but they are in possession of the governmental procuring agency. It can be accessed by anyone through the General Freedom of Information Act. So if any one of the people wants to get a copy of the entire content of the proposals that is being analyzed by government, it can. The person can do it, one can do it, due to the legal institutional environment in Brazil. So I would say from that perspective is that the bidding process, it's a thumbs up, as you can see in my image. It's from the point of view of the regulatory environment, Brazil has had a very open approach during the bidding process. Well, don't get too optimistic here, but because when we come to contract management, that's where the things start getting ugly. On the management phase of the contract, almost nothing is public. First thing is that amendments and all renegotiations are not proactively published. One of you, which is hearing me, is saying, okay, but under Freedom of Information Act, the FOIA Act, someone can request the copies of the amendments. The point is, nobody knows if an amendment actually exists. It's the problem of unknown unknowns. If you don't know if something exists, how it is that you can ask for it. So the question of amendment and renegotiation is a really big issue. If you were ask me, of the 74 contracts signed in Brazil nowadays with fiscal consequences, how many of them have been negotiated? The question is, nobody knows. This is a problem. The second issue here is that performance reports are typically not dealt with in regulations. Some governments do, but most of them don't. So they're not disclosed. So how is a particular PPP project performing if compared against the service level contractually defined? We don't know, and there's no way to know. Also, the third problem here is that special purpose vehicles, the project companies, financial data, how is it doing? Listen to me, I'm not mentioning how is the project sponsors doing. I'm just saying the project company, how is she doing? How is it doing? And the question is, we don't know, because financial data is not disclosed either. One good thing here is that the financial commitments are disclosed every 2 months on the internet by every government. However, it's only done so for the following 10 years. So theoretically, if a contract was to include a huge financial payment, capital grant of some sort, in the 11th year ahead, one cannot see it at all in the published documents. So I think that's, as I said, that's where it gets ugly. The management, the contract management, at least from a regulatory and legal perspective, is where Brazil fails to create conditions for effective transparency. So looking at this now with my evaluation as identification and preparation phases, the transparency is okay. In the bidding, the legal environment does a good job, and in contract management, it does a very bad job. And that's how transparency operates in Brazil. Even though, in this respect, Brazil compares very good with other countries, particularly European countries, in which those hands, those little hands here, the little thumbs, will probably be in a much worse situation than it is in Brazil. What I'm trying to say is that, in spite of problems that I have just mentioned, the Brazilian environment does create conditions for good transparency. So I'd say there's good and bad things in Brazil. As I said, all procurement documents are public and online. That's for the plus side. Contract draft are disclosed with the RFP, which is a good thing. No commercial secrecy protection is allowed for proposals, and there is 10 years, but still there is a projection of direct liabilities. On the minus side, however, the actual signed contract, the paper which people signed, is not disclosed or is not ordered to be disclosed by the legal environment. Most importantly, from my perspective, during the preparation, the decisions being made by the government or by the private sector in unsolicited proposals are not observable. No one can understand why some decisions are being made, and those informations are typically not published. Amendments and renegotiations are not known, which scares me a lot. And fourth, and maybe even more important, is that contingent liabilities, fiscal risks, are a mystery. Nobody understands the potential impact of contracts, because since the actual contracts are not disclosed, contingent liabilities are not properly treated with, nobody knows its consequences. So here is a general map of what I believe is good and bad about institutional environment that pushes for transparency and PPPs in Brazil. As you know, as you can see, there is simultaneously an opportunity to be very transparent and risk for things which are not dealt with in the institutional environments. Okay. Then we come to Minas Gerais. So I'm coming back. So this is the institutional environment in which governments need to operate PPP programs as regards to transparency. And this was the environment I found when I first came to work in the PPP unit of Minas Gerais. And in the next 10 minutes, I would like to show you a bit how did we navigate in this good and bad institutional environment. You might not know, this is Minas Gerais. It's a state in Brazil. Geographically, it's about the size of France, has a 20 million people population, and it has by far the most active and diverse PPP program in Brazil. Those little blue that you can see, the little blue figures there that you can see in the map, are actual signed PPP contracts. And most of them are in Minas. There are two very active states too, which is São Paulo, just south of Minas Gerais, and Bahia, just north of Minas Gerais. But it does have a diverse PPP programs with projects both for social and economic infrastructure. Well, this is Minas Gerais, and Minas Gerais does have a PPP unit, quite a strong one, quite a big one at least. And I used to head it until late last year. But Minas Gerais did adopt, from 2011 to 2013, 2014, a quite radical transparency policy. We had this governor which really believed that transparency was relevant and really pushed for it, which allowed us to design a policy which had three important and basic directives. The first one From 2011, 2012 on to 2012 on, we had full, unredacted disclosure of all programs and projects, which mean scanning contracts, typing to make them machine readable, and putting them online, not only the contracts, but all the amendments and the renegotiations that actually happened with the contract. It also included all regulatory documents. So whenever there was a decision that would, in any case, interfere with the PPP project, it would also go online. We also began to publish our performance reports. All the PPP contracts include performance measurement systems like performance indicators, and they would all be included in a special section of the website that would tell the people how the private sector was performing in the several dimensions that each contract actually established. I'll move on then before entering into details. Well, a more relevant thing was that we began to realize that those full documents, they were not actually downloaded as much as we thought they would be, because they're just too complex to be understood by all audiences. So what we began to do, with the help of World Bank Group and the assistance of the team that worked with Shamala, was to try to recognize that we needed to shape the information for different audiences. So what we began to do is to do specific texts for media, for example, or to prepare contract summaries for service users to make it more easily understood. Understanding that not all people have the technical background to understand the 2,000-page contract that we just relevant, at least for Minas Gerais, and I would also guess for the developing world. Well, so there's three things we did differently. In the project cycle, during the several phases of the appraisal and instruction of the project, and all these milestones would then produce the partial reports, which would go online. We did it for 3 or 4 projects, pilot projects, and that was really interesting. And I'll share with you the results of this in a minute. But that was really interesting because we could actually be transparent along the way and get feedback along the way. There's not much innovation in the bidding process. As you could see, full transparency is already the rule in Brazil, but there was quite an innovation in the 4th stage, which was the contract management. That was probably where we innovated the most, and probably where we faced the biggest challenges. First thing, we began to publish contracts and amendments proactively. The contract was changed, the contractor was renegotiated for whatever reason. It would go online 24 hours once the contract was signed, the amendment was signed. That was a hard thing to do, several resistances, but we did that. We also started to publish the performance reports. I tell a funny situation that happened to me in that World Bank Group's blog post Shamala just mentioned. Shamala could just copy and paste the link here, maybe, if she can. But that is just a funny story. But the real fact is, we published the performance reports, the full content of them online. We did publish the performance reports, the full content of them online. The third innovation important is that, as I said, trying to adapt the information to different audiences, that we started doing project summaries and summarize aspects of the same project from different perspectives, financially, operationally, and others, and then they would all go online with it. And that's what we did. I mean, it was in fact online about our PPP project. Okay, and in the tool to do all of this, to just trying to make it summary here, the tool to increase transparency in all the project cycle was this website. That's just a print of the website as of the last month. It's a beautiful website. That's actually a road, a project, a PPP road that is implemented in Minas. But the tool was our website. And a curious thing, as we were increasing the information available to the public, which I find completely unexpected, is that actually people accessed the website. This is a chart that shows the number of people accessing the website through the Google Analytics report. I added every 2 months here to make the chart more visible. So this is the fact. Since 2010, we had a steady 2,000 visits every 2 months, which is not very much. And this is when, about January, we hired a full-time employee just to update the information website. That's pretty much, financially speaking, all the resources we need. There's this full-time employee. Later on, there was like another half-time person, but by then, a full-time employee was enough. Well, and in March, that's when we published in our website all liabilities of the contract in the long run, which were as I said, published by January. You can see that access actually about doubled it. So about that produced an increase in the access, actually about doubled it, It's about 4,000 access, 4,000 single clicks a month. sectors alike. The problem, however, is that those benefits, the value for money, the stable contract, and the fight of corruption, which is obvious, they bring benefits in the long run, whereas the issues and the problems arise in the short run. So what we need is try to balance the long-term interests of governments, users, and the private sector, and try to focus those interests to fight the illegitimate interests that tries to push for opacity.
See, connect my audio again.
What I could do is try to start answering a question while you solve the technical issue. How does that sound, Reza?
Yes, that's good, Marcus. Thank you very much.
Okay, I can just see Nyananso questions about the audit office here, which is the audit office in Brazil, as I mentioned, at the federal level, has a legal. It's mandatory to approve PPP contracts as soon as they are before the procurement starts. So he gets access to all the information, makes technical evaluations, checks costs, and evaluates all sorts of technical aspects of it. It doesn't disclose anything, well, at least not to all of players, but it doesn't disclose anything. But it does play an important role approving the project. However, it's not as clear its role as in the renegotiation. So whereas it does approve the original version of the contract preliminarily to the procurement, its role during renegotiations is quite confused, and it's not a consensus if it has any role at all. So I would say it plays an important part in transparency as approving the original version of the contract, but it lacks the ability, an important one, to approve and analyze and evaluate amendments. Hope I have answered. Shamala? Well, I think so, yes. I think so. Did I?
Okay, so Marcos, there was another question, which is the old question, what kind of negotiations are you allowed to conduct with the bidder? And what kind of changes can you bring into the published document when the preferred bidder is on board? That's one question which I see here. In case you haven't answered it before, because I lost audio also for some time, if you haven't answered it, maybe take a stab at it, and also talk about disclosure at that stage. How does it work, say in Brazil or in your state, in Minas Gerais?
Okay, the first question is, we don't negotiate anything. I'll give you an example. It's difficult for the internal audit institutions to approve correction of type errors in the contract. They fight the corrections of typos. It seems absurd, doesn't it? But it isn't. Well, it might be absurd, but it's still true, which is the fact that we do not change anything of the contract originally published as a part of RFP. So there's no negotiation during procurement, there's no negotiation after bidding, and the contract sign needs to be exactly the one originally published in all its definitions. What is absurd about this is that despite there is all this concern of non-negotiating, amendments are freely done. So if you want to change anything, the best way is sign the contract 1 year from now. nobody's looking, you go and amend it, which is a way easier one when it comes to changing contracts during procurement and post bidding as it is now. So the second question, Shyamala?
I'm not sure people can hear me. Please let me know if you cannot hear me. One related question that I would like to ask you, Marcos, is that you talked about the audit office and you talked about how all the documents go before, for like pre-audit kind of thing that you have, that all the documents have to go through the audit office before you can put them out and start proceeding on the project. So does it add to the delays? What has your experience been on this?
Well, that's a politically delicate question to ask, but I will try to address that with. Well, as a body that approves project before going to procurement, the role of audit office actually becomes a kind of green light decision role. What the audit office does is actually to be a part of the process, because it makes choices which are included in the final procurement documentation. So I think there's a role confusion here in this pre-auditing situations in which the audit office becomes a PPP unit in a form, as it actually helps to design the project. So when it goes to actually audit it a couple of years later, there is a potential conflict of interest, since it has played a role in structuring the project and it actually approved the procurement. So, well, I do not think this is the best way to move, and but as it turns out, it ends up playing an important role for transparency. So my feeling about this is kind of controversial. I think it produces problems, but it solves another. If I could design the institutions myself, I'll probably not include a pre-audit evaluation, and I'll try to tackle the transparency issues some other way.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marcos. And another issue I would like you to take a little bit of time answering is what do you think should ideally go out? How much information should go out in terms of the evaluation reports? You talked about evaluation reports being, someone talked about evaluation reports being published, I think in Pakistan. So what kind of information should go out in these evaluation reports? All bidders don't like the information coming out on why they were not successful in the bid, and they don't like a comparison coming out. So what kind of information does Minas put out in terms of evaluation reports, evaluation of bidders, and what do you think, in your view, should be the correct amount of information coming out?
Well. This is a very difficult question, Shyamala. Here's what I think. I do not like. the idea of putting out information that private sector, to putting out secrets that the private sector has so long developed, and is their competitive advantages. I think in any market society, the generation of knowledge is certainly should be protected, and there's kind of a ownership to the information that is on the person, on the bids, on the proposals of the private sector. That being said, I think worse than breaking this this legitimate commercial secrecy is having opaque procurement processes. What I'm trying to say is that we have kind of a weight. We have to compare two important values for our society. One is a transparent procurement, and the other one is open commercial secrecy of the bidders and the information we have produced as a competitive process. So when you compare those values, I'm a strong believer that I'm sorry, but commercial secrecy cannot be protected in this context. Because if you protect the information of the proposals, you'll also be protecting unfair procurement, and ultimately it adds value for money. Even though the price we'll be paying for opening commercial secrecy of the private sector will be high, but I'm willing to pay this cost, to pay the private sector the cost of showing everybody its commercial secrecies, because I think it's cheaper, it's less expensive than the opacity that non-transparent institutions produce. I understand I'm a radical at this point, but I'm waiting to be challenged.
I am not sure anyone will challenge you because people who have joined today's webinar are all self-selected, all proponents of disclosure, I think. And there's another question, the last one, which we will tackle because time is going to be up. So very quickly, tell us two things. One, Colombia presents its feasibility studies for bidders and gets their, feedback. And I believe in one of the projects there was so much feedback, 15,000 responses, and the Colombian agency spent a lot of time responding to all of those, and there were consequent delays in the project. I think IFC was handling one of these projects, and a colleague was talking about it. So that is one part of it. So to what extent do you think feasibility reports should come out? And we have a question in the chat box. Yes, that's Joao Sabino. I don't know if I said the name properly. He's asking that question.
Quickly,
to what extent consequences could be there in publishing feasibility studies? And after answering this question, Marcos, could you also then wrap this up and ask, give your views to the audience on what they should take away from your presentation today? One key message.
Sure. Very quickly, I believe one thing is disclosing. Disclosure has a value per se. You just go there, publish it, and people have access to it. The other thing is how you process the feedback. The processing feedback can be really expensive, take time, but I still think it's value for money. It makes sense to process it. But disclosing, even if you do not have time, if you do not read anything that comes back, disclosing makes sense on itself. So if you are trying not to disclose because there will be too many feedback, I don't think it makes sense. Just disclose it and don't consider feedback. Even though considering the feedback, and it takes time, it takes money, but at the end of the day, it's a better project, and that's what we all want. The second question was, what was the second question? I kind of forgot. Shamala? I think I lost the second question. Well,
from your presentation today, as we are at the close of it and we need to wrap it up. So one key message, Marcos.
My personal experience, not only in Minas Gerais, but also visiting other countries, other regions, is that we have a true problem of timing of the incentives here. On the one hand, we do have long-term incentives, long-term benefits of transparency, and on the other hand, we have the short-term problems, complaints of transparency. So effective transparency institutions are those that can bring the decision makers a clear perception of the long-term benefits. If you do this, the decision makers will consider the benefits of transparency to government and use these benefits to fight the short-term interests. And then we all go home with a better infrastructure that meets society's needs. Thanks all for coming. It's been a pleasure to discuss this. Let's continue the discussion on the website, on the blog of World Bank.
Thank you, Marcos, for a very interesting discussion. And we come to the end of this webinar. I do know today there was some technical difficulty because I too missed a little bit of it, and then I went off the air for some time. So we will try to fix these things. I'm not sure why these happen, and whether it's the internet connection from, coming from Brazil and then coming here from Nairobi, or it is some other technical hitch. Sorry about it, but we will make the recordings available. And the earlier recordings, some of which have not been made available so far, they will also be put up as soon as possible. Thank you so much to everyone for joining this. And on the screen in front of you, you'll see feedback. Please give your feedback, very clear and honest feedback, so that we can improve these. Thank you very much.